Well, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our speaker. This is Gary Wolf, and I could spend several minutes talking about Gary's credentials, but I'll try to make it brief. Let me say that I met Gary in 1975, we believe, and we met on the basketball court and spent a few years playing basketball here together.
Too many years.
Too many years. So I've known Gary for quite a while. I until I got on the internet and started looking at his credentials, I was not aware of his prominence in the railroad industry. So I told you a little bit about that in the announcement. I do want to say that Gary played basketball at Ohio University, the Bobcats, and only Jim Gober will know this, but the Ohio University Bobcats in 1969 and 1970 were ranked 5th in the nation for a couple of weeks. They were in the top 20 the entire season, went to the NCAA tournament and lost to Notre Dame. Of course, Gary was a prominent member of that team. But that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk railroads today. And Gary is a well-known speaker in this industry. He has trained over 6,000 people in accident derailment investigation, and has his talk has been described as clear, practical, dynamic, yet down to earth. So we'll see if
tell my wife that, okay? She doesn't get the message all the time.
We'll see if he can live up to that description. So at this time, I'm going to turn things over to my friend Gary Wolf.
Thank you, Bert, and good morning, folks, and good morning out there in the internet world, wherever you are, the Zoom world. Where are we? Here we are. Yeah, Bert didn't tell you, but I actually was involved in setting an NCAA tournament record that still stands today, because I was one of the guys who guarded Austin Carr at Notre Dame the night he put 63 points on us. And I'm still a part of that record. I'm proud of that, okay? We went into that game thinking Austin would get his 30, and our plan was to shut down the two forwards, which we did, but Austin got 63, and we unfortunately lost. So anyway, thank you, Bert, for the introduction, and we're going to rock and roll here. I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you quickly. Talk about the rail industry, the state of the rail industry today, what's going on. It's amazing. I get on airplanes a lot, and I'll get to sit down, and people go, "What do you do?" And I say, "Well, I work in the rail industry." And they'll say, "Do we still have trains today?" And say, "Yeah, we do. We certainly do." And it amazes me how many people just are not that familiar with what the rail industry does every day. And if you ate any cereal today or ate a biscuit, that grain probably rode in a rail car before it hit your lips. So we move most of the food products and all kinds of things. I'll show you in a second. So let's get going on it. Are there any trucking people in the audience? If there is, you might want to leave, because I have some bad words about the trucking industry. But I'm gonna show you some of the facts of what's really going on, because it's important that people kind of know what's going on in our country. You know, you get a lot of fake news these days about things. And the other thing about railroads is we only seem to make the news when something bad happens, something blows up. Like last year at East Palestine, Ohio, terrible tragedy up there. Amazingly, nobody injured or killed, but there's just a lot of damage, obviously. And those are not good things for our industry, but those events are not commonplace, but they do occur. Now, just to kind of fill you in here, this is how I normally dress. I'm not normally seen in a sport coat and jacket or anything. I spent my entire career, I'm now into 54 years in the rail industry. I started in 1970 down the road here at Southern Railway Company. And in 1975, they called me in. I had an engineering background, a master's from Georgia Tech, and computer skills at the time. And they said, you're going to be our derailment guy. And I couldn't hardly spell derailment back then. And I quickly got in the saddle and started learning. And I had to learn the hard way. And that's the best way to learn. And that is on the ground out there in the mud and the dirt and the snow and the ice, picking up train wrecks and figuring out why they derailed, applying my engineering knowledge and what have you. So I've been doing or focused on derailment investigation now for 49 years, going on 50. That's been my passion. Every morning I wake up, I do stuff about train wrecks. I'm excited about it. I'm passionate about it. And I saw a story yesterday on the news. Who was it? One of the famous financial people said, there's one secret to success. And he said, you must have a passion for what you do. And he said, if you don't, you better do something else. And I'm lucky to be one of those guys that loves what he does. I love investigating wrecks. I mean, I'm sorry they happen, but it's, to me, very challenging to go into a twisted wreckage and kind of put the pieces back together and reassemble it and figure out what goes on. It's a very fascinating business. So anyway, that's my normal dress, and here's my office, okay? You'll see in a moment, I've got over 5 million miles on Delta Airlines, flying to train wrecks all over the country and the world for that matter, and a lot of experience doing it, obviously. And just some of the places that I've worked, I've put little stars on the map here. The only continent I haven't been to is Antarctica, and they don't have trains there yet, so that ain't on my bucket list, but I've been everywhere else doing either investigations or other types of technology work in the rail industry. Now, getting there is half the fun. I've been to some very remote places. I've had fixed wing aircraft, I've had helicopters, I've rode horses, I've rode snowmobiles, all in an effort to get to some derailment site because they're never along a major highway. All right, they're always back in the woods somewhere, pretty inaccessible, but that's part of the nature of the business of getting there. And I've hopefully had my last helicopter flight. I had a Air Force captain tell me, he said, you know, helicopters don't fly, they just beat the ground into submission. And that's pretty true. I mean, I'm not a big fan of helicopters. I actually have had a number of helicopter flights, and when they're my size, they're not very large either. Some of the places I've worked, Colombia, South America, I went down there a lot in the 90s when the guerrilla war was in full force, the FARC guerrilla people, and I worked on a big coal railroad down there called Intercore and Drummond both. Pretty rough place. I had armed guards at all times. I was shot at down there in a helicopter, by the way. We were supposed to be inspecting track. They wouldn't let me go on the highways because of the danger. So they put me in a helicopter and we'd fly down and I'd walk a curve in the track and we'd take off and go to the next spot. We're flying along about tree level and all of a sudden the pilot shoots straight up in the air. And I'm banging this guy. If you've ever been in a helicopter, you can't hear. It's noisy as hell. And I'm going, senor, senor, you know, in broken Spanish, trying to tell him we're missing the spot. And he goes, no, senor, no, senor. I go, okay. So we land a little while later down the ways and I go over to one of the captains down there. I said, hey, what's going on? We missed some spots up there. So he goes over to the pilot, and, you know, blah, 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 in Spanish and comes back. He said, well, the guerrillas were shooting at you. And the pilot wanted to get up to 4,000 feet, which is out of the range of their bullets. And I said, that was a good thing. Thank you. So Colombia was very interesting. Worked over in the Sahara Desert in the country of Mauritania, giant iron ore mine up in the Sahara Desert of all places. And they have derailment problems over there. They called me over and Sahara Desert is a spooky place, especially at night. You know, it's vast, it's dark, it's wide. Where else here? Australia. Boy, that's also a remote place. As I said there, I said you can't, it's not the end of the world, but I think I saw it from Australia out back there. There's a lot of people on the coast, Sydney and Melbourne and Perth, but man, in the interior, it's bleak. But it's a fascinating country, great people, good beer, good steaks. So I like going to Australia. And got involved in a little Cold War battle with the Russians back in the early 2000s. An American industrialist bought the railway system in Estonia, one of the Baltic countries that broke off from Russia. And he purchased 30 or 40 General Electric American locomotives to run on the Estonian railway, which previously was all Russian stuff. Well, the Russians got very upset. They were still meddling in Estonian politics and raised a big stink in the press about the safety dangers of these American locomotives because they were bigger and weighed more than the Russian locomotives, and they were going to derail trains and kill people and all this. So got into a legal battle at the World Court in The Hague about Russia's attempt to negate this guy's ability to run these American locomotives. So my team got called in to test the American General Electric locomotive versus the old Russian design you see here on the right side. That's the American locomotive over here. And the Russians have 5-foot gauge track, and we have 4 foot 8.5 inches, which is common in Europe and America. And the Russians changed theirs to 5 so that Germany couldn't invade again and use their trains to get into the Russian network. Pretty interesting stuff. And anyway, we tested these two locomotive designs for about 4 weeks on the Russian-Estonian border, colder than hell, like 30 or 40 below. And the American locomotives proved to be dynamically superior, believe it or not, to the Russian design. So we won our case there, and that was some very interesting work in a fascinating country. So all that travel got me one thing here, a plaque from Delta Airlines last year, thanking me for 5 million miles of service. And to me, it's 5 million miles of misery. I'm not a big airplane fan at 6'8", but they've been pretty good overall. They've gotten a lot better in recent years, but that doesn't count the other airlines that I've flown on. So I'm probably between 6 and 7 million air miles now tracking around on all these train wrecks. So let's get to business today. That's some fun stuff. What are we going to talk about? Some general facts about the U.S. railways, some of the political issues facing railroad systems, particularly railroads versus trucking right now and current and projected business on the railways. And then depending on time, I'll mention passenger rail. I always get these questions. Why don't we have high-speed rail in America like Europe does? And it's Italy and Germany and France. And I'll comment on that if we have time and maybe talk a little bit about technology. So let's get on to some facts and figures about the rail industry. Currently, we have about 140,000 route miles of track in America alone. Now, that doesn't count Canada, and Mexico, by the way, which has become a very good rail partner. We have over 150,000 employees in the rail industry, and there's 6 major railways left in America, all right, called Class I railways. There's 2 in the east, CSX and Norfolk Southern. There's 2 in the west, Union Pacific and Burlington Northern, owned by Warren Buffett. And there are 2 Canadian railways, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific. And those 6 railways dominate the industry in terms of business, revenue, et cetera. In addition, we have close to 600 short line and regional railways. These are railroads that might be 2 miles long, like out here in Fulton County, Warehouse District. There's a railway called the Fulton County Railway. I don't know, it's got 8 or 9 miles of track, but they switch all those big warehouses. So those are called short lines. So it's a pretty big industry. We carry everything that Americans depend on, from energy, coal, oil, whatever, foodstuffs, raw grain, corn, paper products, lumber, building materials, aggregates, steel products, everything heavy is what the railways carry. Most of your heavy commodities, potash, iron ore, stuff like that. And so, like I said, if you turned your lights on today, these light bulbs are lit by coal from Powder River, Wyoming, and brought down here to Plant Scherer, south of Atlanta. And we have a big coal plant up by Cartersville as well. And if you turned your lights on today, it's because a train brought the coal somewhere, okay? Now, there is some nuclear in Georgia, I recognize that. The network of railways in America is like a bowl of spaghetti. You can see here in the east, it's pretty complex, a lot of overlapping tracks. As you move out west, the tracks are further apart, get separated, and don't serve, well, there's not many big cities in the interior west out there, but that's kind of what our network looks like. Pretty, as I said, about 140,000 miles of track. And we're heavily regulated. This is a sideways view of the Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations. And as some of you guys in the room are lawyers, I know you know about the CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, governing just about every industry from food products to aviation, et cetera. But you can see the progression of regulations from the 1970s over here. This was the CFR then, to the 90s under Bill Clinton. He added a number of pages to it. Very proud of that, he was. And then we're up here now in the 2000s, over 1,200 pages of federal regulations. That's not counting state regulations and other things. So we're a very heavily regulated industry. Railroads were the first really mechanized industry that powered the Industrial Revolution. When America broke out from being an agrarian continent, you know, farming and stuff, and started making steel and other products, the railroads were the vital supply line for those industries. And as such, regulations were quickly developed by Congress to govern the rail operations. So that's how we ended up with so many regulations. We own our own rights of way. We're very capital intensive. If you have a railway running through your county, it may be a narrow strip of 100-foot strip of land, but it's heavily taxed, and generally the school systems that have a railroad in their county are very rich because they tax railways quite a bit for their right-of-way, okay? And also railways plow roughly 20% of their revenue back into their physical plant just to keep their tracks maintained and safe and open. And you can't say that about the truck industry. I'll get to that in a moment, but we have to plow about 20% back. And just to show you, railways spend on an annual basis somewhere between 20 and $30 billion in capital improvements and capital investment into the rail network. And today, I can say unabashedly that the rail systems in America are the finest they've ever been. They're well maintained, they're heavy duty, and we do a better job than any country in the world of moving freight, okay? Now, we'll talk passengers later. That's another topic. But as far as powering an economy, we are the best without any question. We're so far ahead of China and Russia and all these other countries who are trying to play catch up. They're trying to learn from us. Might take a while, but for instance, in Russia and China and other countries, the maximum axle load is about 22, 24 tons. In America now, we're pushing 38 to 40 tons, almost double. So we're doing it right. Also, just to show you a number of industries some of you may be involved in, chemicals, paper, whatever. Most of the heavy industry in America plows 2 or 3% of their revenue back into capital investment. But as I said, railways plow about 20% back to maintain their rights of way and equipment. Now, we're in a very heavily subsidized economy in America in that the waterways, the barge systems, go up and down the rivers, and the Corps of Engineers pretty much takes care of their right of way. They maintain all the dams, they build them, maintain them, they provide all the buoys, navigational aids, and so barges generally have a pretty much a free ride. The trucks run up and down our interstate system that was funded by taxpayers and largely maintained by taxpayers. And you'll see in a moment that trucks pay a pittance of their revenue to maintain the interstate highway system. And that's why right now, if you drive the interstate highway systems to Florida or like I do out to Montana every year, it's, I I would say 20% of the route is orange cones. And I wish I had invested in a company that made orange barrels and orange cones, because they're everywhere. Because our interstates are crumbling, they're in terrible condition, they have not been maintained. The politicians are not putting the money back in our infrastructure, contrary to the quote infrastructure bill signed recently. It's a sad state that our country has fallen into as far as that goes. Air traffic, although not a big competitor to rail, they're heavily subsidized. Just about every airport is built with government funds, government money. The air traffic control system is maintained by the government. Yeah, airlines pay some user fees, but again, it ain't nowhere near 20% of their revenue like railways pay. And finally, people say, well, railroads got those land grants. Abraham Lincoln gave the Union Pacific the right of way to build to California, and yes, he did. And several other railways got land grants to develop the West. But those land grants were quickly paid off in terms of railroads had to give the government reduced rates on military and mail traffic. And so those land grants were paid off 100 and some years ago. And the land grants actually allowed the railways to build into the West and develop the West in the 1800s. I tell people the Abraham Lincoln signing that bill in the Civil War to build a transcontinental railway, to me, was more impressive than the moonshot that John Kennedy promised. When you think about what the people had to face to build a 2,000 to 3,000 mile transcontinental railway through the interior of America, where there were no roads, no highways, and Indian wars going on the whole time, it was a hell of an accomplishment. It really was. Not to deny or denigrate the moonshot, which was also, but I'm just saying, when you compare the two, they're kind of interesting there. Our system mileage has been decreasing from about 1960 here to present. We had over 200,000 miles of track back in the 60s, and now we're down to about 130 or so thousand miles of track. Our network has been collapsing. We've been abandoning track, pulling up tracks that are no longer needed. As certain communities lose their businesses and things, the railways have no need. So we've been losing trackage. And at the same time, though, our ton miles of traffic have increased until about 2008. And of course, we had the big recession in 2008. And as you can see, that railway traffic has not really recovered. And in fact, the last couple of years, 4 or 5 years, our rail traffic has started dropping quite a bit. And there's some very disturbing trends in the rail industry here. I've got 4 lines on here. I'll describe them to you. This is 1964 to 2023 over here. In 1980, the Staggers Act was signed into law that deregulated railways. Up to 1980s, the federal government regulated every tariff, every rate that railways could charge. After 1980, railways were free to set rates that was commensurate with the cost of doing business. And because of that, stock market money, investment money, started flowing into railways because they could get a return finally. And railways started investing in a new plant, new equipment, new locomotives, and the business took off. This is our volume in green. It took off, and we built volume again until about 2008, and then we flattened out, and now we've been on a slight decline since about 2020 or so. Blue is railway productivity, zoomed up. That's ton miles per employee, but that's been fairly flat. Our rates have been flat, and our revenue has not really kept up with the business because of competitive reasons, largely from the truck industry. And we'll get to that in just a second. But those are some of the trends in the industry. And 2024 started out a pretty bleak picture. This is the weekly rail traffic in America. And you can see it's been 3 years shown up there. The orange line is 22, I mean. The light blue line is 2023, and the dark blue is this year, 2024. You can see we had a heck of a dip in January, and our traffic was lagging the last 2 years, which were not great years. And then just recently, in the last 4 to 5 weeks, our traffic has picked up. And I don't know all the reasons why, but it's good for the railways. A lot of it is the container business coming in for Christmas season. September, October tend to be a very busy season for rails because that's when all the warehouses are stocking up on their goods from China and the Far East. So anyway, I hope our traffic continues to hold strong through the year, but overall, it's not a good year. Now, I've mentioned several times trains versus trucks. What's the big deal? And is it a level playing field? Well, you're going to see in a moment, it really isn't. The trucks have an unfair advantage over railways, and I'm not up here whining about it. It's the political facts of life, but the truckers are getting pretty much a free lunch from you, the taxpayers. You're funding their highway system. They're not very fuel efficient. They're clogging our interstates up. They're causing causing truck wrecks. So a lot of things here to take a look at. One truck does as much damage to an interstate highway as 10,000 automobiles. And that's why all your bridges are being replaced. The vertical impact damage on bridges from a truck is as people have said, is about what 10,000 cars do. One truck earns about $200,000 to $300,000 a year in revenue and only pays $3,000 or $4,000 a year in road use taxes. Again, probably 1% or less of their revenue versus a railway that plows 20% back to maintain their private right-of-way. Okay. So I said railroads put 20% back, etc. Whoop. This is from a report. It says that freight trucks cause 99% of wear and tear on U.S. roads, but only pay 35% of the maintenance. Okay. So again, they're getting quite a free ride from you, the taxpayers. You're funding their ability. So when a truck comes to a business and says, I can haul your load for $1,500 to California, the railroad might have to say, we'll charge you $2,000 because we got to put 20% of our revenue just to keep the tracks open. But you're funding the tracks for the truck, the interstate highway system, you see? So that's the problem and why we've been losing business to trucks over the years. In our federal transportation budget, DOT budget is $400 to $500 billion a year, okay? Highways get 60-some% of that, and that's largely the truck industry. Railroads get about 1% of the federal transportation budget for bridges and various improvements and things. So again, a paltry sum compared to the subsidy going to the trucking industry. And when it comes to hazardous material spills and explosions and things, railroads always make the news like they did last year, which is unfortunate. But on an annual basis, trucks have about 20,000 hazmat spills of hazardous materials, from gasoline to oil to other chemicals. And railways have roughly 20 to 25 spills a year. Again, quite a stark contrast there. So rails are much safer to move your products than truck is. I mean, do you want to be going down I-75 with an 80-mile-an-hour tank truck beside you carrying LNG or gasoline? Or would you rather that stuff be on a railroad track somewhere back in the woods? Okay. And in 2021, there were over 500,000 large truck accidents, semi-tractor trailer type accidents, causing over 100,000 injuries and over 6,000 deaths and fatalities involved in large truck accidents. When you put an 80,000-pound truck next to a 3,000-pound Subaru going down the interstate, it's no match when a collision occurs. And you know who's going to lose. It's the little car, okay? Laws of physics. So over the years, as a result of a lot of these inequities, the truck business has been increasing. This is 2008, if you can't see it on the screen, our big recession there in 2008. And then truck business has been steadily growing. Now, it has leveled off since 2020. In the last 3.5, 4 years, the truck business has leveled off quite a bit as our whole economy is in the rut right now. contrary to what you might hear on the news. It ain't a pretty picture as far as U.S. Production goes. And so trucks are suffering a bit now. And rail has been in a steady decline since '08, again, at the expense of the truck industry picking up. So it is what it is, you know. The politicians make the rules, and a lot of reason, you know, railways have tried to get higher truck taxes and things passed in Congress, but the Teamsters are a very powerful voting bloc, all right, because every city, every state, every county has truck drivers in it, unlike railroads, all right? And so, and they hear from their the congressmen, congresswomen hear from the Teamsters quite a bit. It was kind of ironic. Did you hear the news this week about the Teamsters? Found that kind of amazing. We won't get into politics here, will we, Bert? But anyway. All right, and just as I mentioned U.S. industrial production a minute ago, I don't know how many people realize this, but you know, going back to the 1970s, we were producing quite a bit of goods, like durable goods, like appliances and automobiles, steel products, building products. We were a producer nation. And since about the 70s, our industrial production has been on a decline. And we had a little resurgence in 2016, started picking up. I was optimistic. We were bringing businesses back to America, especially down in the Louisiana area, Texas area. A lot of companies came in to America from Europe to build factories, to supply chemical products, plastic products to the US. And then that kind of ended. And the last 4 years, we've been in a decline in our industrial production. And that's, again, affecting railways. Projections show that trucking will double in size in the next 25 years, the green line, and railways are going to have a pretty bleak, flat line like that. Not a good picture if you're in the rail business, certainly. But here's the problem. One of the inconvenient truths is the truckers use the interstate highway system, and these red lines show every area that is projected to be at or over highway capacity. It's over 40,000 miles of our interstate network in the next several years. And anybody who drives around Atlanta knows the mess that we're in with highways, okay? Every year I drive back and forth to Montana, and the three worst places to drive through are Atlanta, getting out of Atlanta, going through Chattanooga, and going through Nashville. And once I make it through those three cities, it's pretty much a straight shot, but the amount of congestion in the east is just overwhelming right now, and that's affecting the truckers' ability to be reliable and deliver products on time. So is there growth potential for rail? Yes and no. Predominantly or traditionally, coal was king on the railways. We handled 40% of our revenue came from coal shipments for many, many years. But that's no longer. Since Mr. Obama started the war on coal in 26, you'll see in a moment, coal production has plunged dramatically. It's a sad, I mean, we can burn coal. It's not as nasty as everyone says. Go up to Plant Bowen in Cartersville. They have scrubbers up there, and they're burning Indiana and Kentucky coal very cleanly, okay? But coal has gotten a bad rap, and it's plunged. So coal ain't the future. It's going to be intermodal, shown on the left there, the container business, because now we're an importing country. We're a consuming country, no longer a production country. And most of the rail business is now going to move over to hauling containers full of the crap that goes to Walmart and Costco and everywhere else, okay? And most of it is, by the way. I mean, I go into a store, I try to buy America, I'm sorry. I had a metallurgical testing lab for many years. We tested all kind of railroad products, broke things, and did fatigue testing, and I can tell you, some of the products coming from overseas are just garbage. We had one case where the Canadians bought, I think it was 50 miles of rail from China. Got a real good deal on it back about 10 or 12 years ago. Within 1 year, they had over 100 rail failures in that 40 miles. Now, on a regular railway, American rail, you might get 3 or 4 failures, okay? But in 1 year, they had over 100 rail failures. And of course, the Chinese blamed it on the installation practices, which was nonsense, but we sliced and diced those rail sections. They were horrible, full of porosity, full of slag, full of contaminants. So you got to beware, all right? Americans are buying a lot of junk right now. Air conditioners, they'll last 3 or 4 years today. They used to last, I have an air conditioning buddy, John Morrison, you know? Air conditioners used to last 20 years, your compressors and things. These guys that do air conditioning business say, if you get 5 years out of a compressor today, you're lucky. So a lot of the junk coming in is in these containers. And double stack is the way to go. The railroads innovated this process where you can put 2 containers on top of one another. And now we run these double stack trains from Long Beach, from San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle, over to Chicago, Atlanta, to the inland ports. That's kind of the process, okay, is double stacking. It's the way to go. So the ship comes in to Long Beach, LA port, the big cranes dumping on one of these double stack rail cars, and away it goes to Atlanta or wherever, Chicago, big distribution, Memphis, and then it's offloaded to a truck to go out 20 miles to an Amazon warehouse or a Costco or a Walmart or wherever. That's kind of the way the system's working. In 2022, our intermodal volume was about 27% of our revenue, which is a good thing, okay? Not like coal was, but at least it's there. And about half of intermodal volume consists of imports or exports in terms of international trade. And one intermodal train, like you saw in that picture, can take 280 trucks off the highway, which is a good thing for congestion, for pollution, for fuel conservation. Taking trucks off the interstate would be a good thing. But even with those growth numbers, the last several years, our intermodal volume has started to decline again at the expense of trucking. Trucking industry is undercutting our rates again because they have an advantage on the economic side. And so even though we can play a vital role, we're just not getting the business that's out there, which again, I hate to see. Talk about coal for a moment. 92% of mined coal in America produces electricity. The other 8% goes into coke and steel making process. Today, about 20% of our electricity production is coal, and natural gas is now about 40%. That has changed dramatically, okay, over the last 15 years or 10 or 12 years, whatever it is. Natural gas has taken a lion's share of the electrical production. Now, what's happening though is as fracking was banned a couple years ago, at least on public lands, what happened is natural gas is a byproduct of fracking for oil. It's a freebie. That's what comes out of the ground when you get the oil is natural gas. And now, so natural gas prices have gone up, and now coal is coming back, which kind of makes me laugh. The environmentalists, you know, we're always denigrating coal, and now they killed fracking, which killed natural gas. So now power plants are shifting back to coal in the last couple of years in some cases. So that's an unusual dynamic going on. Oh, and I wanted to mention Plant Scherer down near Macon and Plant Bowen in Cartersville in Georgia here are the first and second largest coal-fired plants in America. The third one is down near Houston, Texas. But we still rely heavily in Georgia on coal. And there's about 34 train sets of 120 cars riding like a continuous conveyor belt from Georgia out to Wyoming and back. As we sit in this room right now, there's 34 trains somewhere along that route with loaded coal and taking empties back to Wyoming, as well as going up to Kentucky and Indiana. So we're still lucky here, and that's why Georgia still has some pretty favorable electric rates compared to other parts of the country. Here's a chart showing U.S. coal consumption over the last years, and coal was gaining until the war on coal started in 2008 or so, right here. And now coal has been in a precipitous decline. As I've been talking to you about, here's the facts to back that up. So coal ain't coming back, I'm afraid, but we have more coal reserves than any country in the world. In fact, most of our coal mining today is export coal. It's going to Korea, it's going to China, going to Japan, and going to Europe because they don't have the good quality coal that we do. And whether it's metallurgical coal or bituminous power coal, we're doing more export than we are burning it here in America. So we're just shifting the pollution around because China and these places, they have very little pollution control in their power plants. We have excellent pollution control. But again, that's the political nature of it. And if you look at US railway coal shipments from about 2014, that was sort of a peak, we've been slowly on a decline from about 6 million carloads a year to somewhere around 3 or 4 million carloads a year. So as I said, coal is not coming back, but here's an inconvenient truth, folks. Where do you think all these electric cars get their electricity from at night? It ain't windmills and ferry farts, okay? It's coal or nuclear in some cases. And if people are going to drive electric cars, they need to have somewhere a big power plant making the voltage to recharge their cars. And I just don't think anybody has really thought of this whole problem. It is a big problem. And I think we're starting to see the end of the fad of electric vehicles. I've been told that a lot of Tesla owners are trying to sell them. You can't find charging places. It takes too long to recharge. In some cases, maybe electric cars make sense. Driving around Buckhead, maybe. Great idea. But going to Chattanooga and back, I don't know. So, and as I said, on the energy balance, when you have to, here's the crazy thing about electric vehicles. So now we're going to burn coal in Cartersville. We're going to make electricity, and we're going to put that in a wire and send it down to Atlanta to your garage to charge your vehicle at night. Do you know how much electrical loss is in those electric lines called resistance? It ain't a free ride. You put in 1,000 volts here, you might get out, 600 down here because there's losses in those wires. And you've probably had an extension cord in your house overheat or something. That's called resistance to electrical current. And so we're just trying to ship electricity around now instead of burning it in your car in terms of gasoline or LNG or whatever. So it's really kind of nuts what people are doing with that. Talking about energy efficiency, here's the contact patch of a steel wheel on a rail from a railroad car. That's a US penny that I put under a 140-ton coal car and let the wheels of the coal car squish it. And it squished it out into the exact area of contact, which is less than 1 square inch. So rail is a very efficient way. It is very minimal contact, very minimal friction between the wheel and rail versus a rubber tire on a highway, which has 6 to 8 times the friction to move it. So railroads are energy efficient. Here's our friend Warren Buffett, who bought the Burlington Northern Railway. It's the only privately owned railway in the country versus the other 5 are owned by stockholders. But Warren took the BN private years ago. And one train can move 1 ton, 500 miles on 1 gallon of fuel. And that's about 5 times more efficient than what a truck can do. So we're about 3 or 4 times more efficient than trucks. We get 410 ton miles per gallon. They get about 100 ton miles per gallon. So again, on the energy consumption side, rail has a tremendous advantage. And if 10% of highway freight were moved over to rail, we'd save 200 million gallons of diesel fuel a year. And that's more than the US Navy burns every year. So there's a tremendous opportunity to move some of this freight off the interstate and put it on steel wheels and get it to destination. Currently, we carry about 42% of the tonnage. And because we carry commodities, our revenue is pretty low on that stuff. Where you make money hauling goods is on high value stuff like flat screen TVs or pharmaceuticals or California wine, okay? They can charge a lot of money to haul that stuff. But rails, we haul the dirty stuff, the gravel, the coal, the grain, the corn, and we don't get as much revenue per ton. But we still get about 42% of the tonnage, and we only create 9% of the nitrous oxide gases or greenhouse gases and particulate matter. So again, we haul the bulk of the tonnage, but we're very low polluting. In fact, if you look at the energy use by mode, if this is a pie chart, this is light duty trucks, long trucks, tractor trailer trucks. Trucks consume about 75% of our energy consumption for transportation, and railways here consume 1.7%, but we move 48% or whatever it was of the tonnage. And if you look at greenhouse gas production, again, light duty vehicles in blue, medium heavy duty trucks in orange here, other stuff here, but the truck side, about 75 to 80% of greenhouse gases are produced by them. And again, rails in here about 2%. So we're more energy efficient and much more kind to the environment than the truck mode is. So the bottom line is trucks own most of the market share on the short haul corridors of 100 to 600 miles. Railroads need to learn, and I'll take the lumps here. We're not doing a very good job either as a rail industry of trying to learn how we can serve the shorter haul markets, 500, 600 miles. We have got to innovate, find ways to do that. And on the other side, the government needs to incentivize rail in the long distance corridors. There's no reason trucks are pulling containers from Long Beach to Atlanta. That just doesn't make a lick of sense. But they're getting a free ride, okay? But that stuff should be on rails for the economic good of our country, the safety of our country, and the energy consumption in our country. So we need to figure out how to turn that equation around, reduce congestion on our highways. If we could get a lot of the trucks off the highways. I have an idea. You want to talk about a political non-starter, but if I was president, here's what I would do. I would sell the present interstate highway system to the truck industry for $1 and say, you own it, now you maintain it. And I would build a highway automobile, less than 7,000 pound cars, interstate highway system down the medians, on the sides or wherever, only for automobiles. Because here's the deal. When we built the interstate highway system, when Eisenhower did this, every bridge has to have beams that tall because a truck weighs 80,000 pounds. So, and the concrete has to be 14 inches thick because of what trucks weigh. If you build an interstate for automobiles, the concrete would only have to be that thick, the bridge beams that thick. You could do it a hell of a lot more economic than trying to build a highway system to accommodate 80,000 pound rigs and 3,000 pound, Priuses, all right? That's what I'd do, but nobody wants to hear that, right? I'm too old to run for office. So we need to level the playing field. Now, I got a few more minutes. I'll talk about rail safety issues because that's foremost in the news a lot. There's the Palestine wreck up there in the corner of the screen. Terrible incident and derailment last year, which unfortunately we're still litigating in the courts. And the other thing people often hear about are crossing accidents where motorists get in front of a train, and that's a non-winner for a car driver when it happens. Here's a chart of our train wrecks since the 1975, the year I started doing train wrecks right here. We were having 6,000 to 7,000 derailments a year in America, reportable to the federal government. We brought those numbers down in the 1990s into the 2000 range. We had a little bump in early 2000s. I won't go into details why that occurred, but we corrected it. But now for the last 10 or 12 years, the number of derailments has been pretty flat. To me, I'm very upset about that. We know how to bring derailments down, but there's just been a little reticence to do things that need to be done. And certainly money plays into it, okay? The investment money to make things happen. Until we have a more level playing field, it's tough for railways to make those investments. But it ain't getting worse. That's good news, but it's not getting better. So that's where we are currently. And if you wonder, this is a breakdown with 3 years of derailment data. About a third of train wrecks are caused by human failure, operator failure. About a third are caused by the track structure, failing the tracks, the ties, the rail, and then miscellaneous and vehicle stuff comprise the rest of it. That's how it breaks out. But even given those numbers, we're a very safe industry. Here's the industry industry safety statistics for major U.S. industries. Here's railroads on the far left, 1.0 injury per 200,000 man hours. And on the far right is the aircraft or the airline industry that's up around 5 injuries per 200,000. These are government statistics reported to the federal government. I mean, look at some of these things. Grocery stores, 3.0, waterways, trucking industry, 3.0, and here's railroads. We take safety very seriously, and we believe every employee should go home at night with their hands, their feet, their fingers, okay? And that's our goal, and we live safety. Safety is number one in the rail industry. We start every meeting in our industry with a safety briefing, okay? Telling people where are the exits, where's the AED system, where's the fire extinguisher. We're very serious about safety. Something that hits home a lot with people and is in the news are accidents at grade crossings where automobiles get struck by trains, people get injured and killed, very sad situation. But again, we've made tremendous progress. Going back to 1980, we were having close to 10,000 crossing accidents a year, and we've now brought that number down to around 2,000 a year. Again, it's leveled off. It's not getting any better, but as I tell people, it's hard to fix stupid. When you put crossing lights up like you see in this picture, and you've got 13 or 14 flashing red lights and a motorist drives around them, what are you supposed to do? You know, 50% of these crossing accidents that you hear about occur where we've invested $100,000 to $300,000 on a crossing protection system like you see in that picture. But people try to beat the train, try to ignore the lights, and they end up dead. Not a happy picture. Now, passenger rail travel, why don't we have high-speed trains in America like we do in Europe? You know, everybody's been to Europe and you probably rode a high-speed train somewhere. Well, there's a lot of good reasons. Number one, we love our cars, and we are privileged to have gas at $3 or $4 a gallon, where in Europe, Canada, and elsewhere, it's $6 to $7 a gallon. If our gas prices were $6 or $7, you couldn't get on a MARTA train, all right? But right now, people are very happy to stay in their cars. They can text people on their, radio or whatever, listen to radio, whatever they do in their cars. And so they're happy that way. Also, we have cheap airfares in America. When they wanted to build a high-speed rail line between Houston and Dallas, Southwest went to the governor of Texas and said, if you build that rail line, we're pulling out of every airport in Texas. And so they backed off, okay? So the airfares are undercutting rail travel. Again, aircraft business is heavily subsidized. I mean, look at your airline ticket. You pay a lot of taxes in there, but the airlines get pretty much a free ride at Hartsfield and other airports. Well, they pay use fees, but again, they can beat us on fares. The legacy cities of Europe were built around rail infrastructure, and we were built around the interstates. And so rail travel in America, people say, well, did airplanes kill the railway service? No, it was the interstate highways in 1960. As soon as the interstates opened, people got off trains left and right, and the US rail travel plummeted in 1960s. And we got NIMBYs everywhere, not in my backyard. Everybody wants high-speed rail, like to Chattanooga say, and we say, well, we're going to have to acquire some farmland up there by Calhoun or Cartersville. Oh, no, not my farm, So they tried to build high-speed rail in California, to be energy efficient and non-polluting. And as soon as they started the process, oh, don't buy my farm, don't buy my land, okay? So anyway, that's a problem. And we need to acquire new right-of-way. You can't put high-speed rail in a freight corridor. That's something else politicians don't understand. You can't mix the two. Rail, the curves have to be elevated to a certain degree versus high-speed rail. And it's very hard to mix and match in the same corridor with today's tonnages. So we got to acquire new right-of-way to build high-speed rail. And we run about, even though with those words I said, we have about 3 billion passenger trips a year in North America. There's 18 commuter rail systems, 40 heavy rail transits like MARTA, and 24 light rail systems across America. If you look at this map of the US, Most of the Amtrak business is sequestered up here in what's called the Northeast Corridor from Boston to New York down to Washington. And that's probably 75% of the Amtrak business in America is up there. Yeah, a little bit out on the West Coast, up the California corridor, hardly any business in the middle. And that's just the way it is. And if you look at transit ridership, the size of the blue dot is how many millions of people ride trains. It's all, again, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, up in the Northeast. That's where most of the transit ridership is. And our passenger rail travel, Amtrak miles have been flat, the passenger miles have been flat from about 5,000 a year in 2000 to 5,000 a year today. So Amtrak is not growing. It's pretty stagnant. The people that ride Amtrak pretty much do it because they like riding trains and they don't need to get anywhere on time. So that's kind of what it's boiled down to. That brings us to MARTA. And the question is it SMARTA, as they used to say a few years ago in their slogan? Well, this just astounds me. I don't really know all what's going on, but here's the MARTA ridership from 2014 to present. The blue line is the total number of MARTA trips. And starting in COVID year, it's plummeted quite a bit. And we used to ride about 140,000 passenger trips a year, and we're down in the 60,000 range in MARTA. Even though the city has grown exponentially, people are not riding MARTA in Atlanta. I don't know why. I know some of the reasons, but it could be a hell of a lot better, but it isn't. So the conclusion is people like trains, they just don't like to ride them. Yes, sir. Question?
I've always been fascinated by trains. When I was a kid, my train set was my favorite toy to play with.
Yep.
But I live in Vinings, and I've spent my share of time counting railroad cars going by.
Down where?
But I have the question I have is how does the industry feel about graffiti?
Graffiti?
And I have a vision that there are two gangs in New York, and all they do is spend their time spraying graffiti on railroad cars. Is there an industry-wide attempt to try to get to stop that, or do you not care, or what is it?
All right. I got just a few seconds here. Graffiti is the question. Look, I'm amazed the amount of money spent on graffiti paint. This ain't cheap to spray and paint an entire rail car. I'm probably talking $100, $200 worth of spray paint pans, spray cans. It's a law enforcement problem. It's vandalism, it's trespassing, but law enforcement in America doesn't want to do anything about it. I'm sorry, they just don't. You call up and say, I have a kid spray painting a rail car here at 14th Street. And then the other thing on the radio, we got a domestic quarrel on 20th Street. Where are they going to go? To get the guy spray painting a rail car or try to solve a domestic dispute? So graffiti, railroads don't like it. They spray paint over our tags, our nomenclature. We can't read the numbers. It's a terrible thing, and it's ugly as hell, but it's not a railroad problem. We fence, we patrol. We have our own police force. Railroads have their own security force, and we monitor rail yards and things, but until mothers and fathers start disciplining their kids, and until schools start sending a message, and until law enforcement, it's going to continue to happen. You can't go in a hardware store in California and buy spray paint. It's locked up like razors are here in Atlanta, okay, for some reason, because of the vandals that spray paint stuff. So, and it's just not rail cars. Look around Atlanta, the graffiti on bridges, and it's just ugly as hell. It'd be so easy to stop it today with GoPro cameras mounted around, but there's no political will to do it. I'm sorry.
Gary,
I could stop it. If I was mayor of Atlanta, I could stop graffiti in a month, but there's no willpower to do it.
Gary, we have a hard stop at
Okay.
9 o'clock. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation.
to move a ocean container from Long Beach to a distribution center in Atlanta. The cost of intermodal using rail and truck.
Trucks are undercutting right now.
What about service time? Time.
We do it in about, well,